How factual is this?
It's quite. I mean, it's still done to this day. That not necessarily about nuclear, but about. It's a thing that was done in the 60s and 70s quite extensively about nuclear, where civil servants would play exactly this game. Now it's done about Ebola, about bird flu, and anything that they think they'll probably be doing one about Calais. Anything that they think might be controversial and where they might have to make bold decisions, like about Calais, about Operation Stack, and things like that. That will probably have been devised in a room of civil servants. That idea would probably have been devised in a room full of civil servants and then taken to their masters. And so it's a done thing. Yes.
And have you actually seen any of these, or are they under the Official Secrets Act?
No, I've got the minutes for a lot of the meetings from the 60s and 70s. I spent a lot of time at the National Archive reading them, and they're all fascinating. And it is remarkable the stuff that seemed important to them. And a lot of that stuff is in the film.
And during your research, did you get a chance to talk to any of the people who were actually present during these meetings?
I didn't. No. I didn't get that chance. We did speak to quite a few civil servants, and actually, when we screened this film in Rotterdam, we got a chance to speak to the ambassador for Holland, the British ambassador for Holland, who was a very interesting guy whose previous job before getting to Holland had been to be basically the point guy on the Arab Spring in the Foreign Office. And he talked about never leaving the office, sleeping in the office, and he talked a lot about how these sort of scenarios were played during that time, which was fascinating.
And before I come to you, Tom, I'm just curious, because of your career as a playwright, did you always think this is going to be a screenplay, or did at any point in time did you think, because of the nature of this claustrophobic environment, it would be a very good stage play?
I think it would be a bad stage play. I mean, I did toy with it being a stage play. The reason why is because I think you need to see their faces, and you need to see their faces in extreme close-up, because the film is entirely about those actors and how brilliant they are, and the fact that the these are not people that emote in a sort of Macbethian manner. These are people who emote by moving an eyebrow, and to on stage you wouldn't have had a chance to see what they're doing in the sort of close-up that I think it's necessary for us to see. And I think it's better as a film.
It's a film.
Yeah.
So, Tom, you both have worked together for quite a long time on different projects. At what point did you come on board, and what was it that sort of attracted you to this?
Jack just sent me the script. I'd been working on a.
We talked about it a bit, yeah.
Yeah, we knew that we wanted to work with each other again, and had been working on various bits and pieces, I think.
Yeah, trying to make other stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'd had a film that just hadn't worked out, and I'd spent quite a lot of time working on it, and I was a bit disappointed that hadn't got made, and Jack sent me the script and was like, well, let's just make this. It's set in a room, and we can just go and do it.
And you pulled out of 2 projects I've written before, and I said I'd send it to you. I said I'd send it to you if you kind of had some sort of commitment in your head, and you said okay, yeah.
Well, no, we didn't do it then though. Then we waited 6 months.
Oh yeah, and then I thought you might pull out again. Yeah.
But then we did decide that I guess we're just getting films made is hard, and lots of them don't happen for all sorts of reasons, and this was something that we thought that we both love it and we both believe in it, and we're going to make it whatever happens, and so we'll just start down this road. And
it was a Ben Miller interview where he just said, I set a date, on his film, whatever it was, the comic film with Johnny Harris in it, and he said, I set a date and said I'm going to make it on this date, and we tried to do exactly the same thing.
Yeah. And then we got talking to Lauren Dark, our producer, who's over there, and Ryan McKinnon, and they just they sort of made it happen. So we said we're going to set a date, and then they made it happen for that date.
Yeah.
And it was a really liberating process, actually, just to know that for whatever whatever money we were able to attract or weren't able to attract, we were just going to do it. And then fortunately, we then worked with Steve and Mike at Archer's Mark, and they kind of believed in us and gave us the money to sort of have more or less a free rein on it. And Jack's script, you know, that actors we sent it to and seemed to respond to it and came on board, and it's lovely to do something that is made for not a great deal of money, because people do it for just because they want to do it. You know, it sort of takes out all the other stuff, and it becomes
a great environment and atmosphere. Then, like Lauren's dad was doing all the food and the catering for it, it becomes a very family thing, I think, which is like a brilliant atmosphere to be creative in.
Yes, and everyone mucks in with everything, and it feels really like everyone's doing it for the people and for the work, and that's really ultimately what it's about.
So Shaun, it's sort of like asking the actor who's appearing in Glengarry Glen Ross, what was it about this very wordy script that attracted you as an actor? But what was it when you got the script that appealed to you about the character of Tom? But beyond that, I know you had a week's rehearsal. How much sort of expectation was there on you to come up with a backstory or come up with ideas about the character to bring along?
Well, way before that, I'd met Jack years and years ago for a play we'd met about something, and I was like so impressed. It didn't work out, I can't remember why, but it didn't work out at the time. And then, so I always thought, God, I wonder what he's doing. And then watched him, all of his work since then, for the most part. And then when I read this, I was like, God, I didn't fully understand it, and I had to keep coming back to it. So I read it 2 or 3 times on the first reading and thought, well, because I suppose I'm not that au fait with some of the subject matter in it. And then the more I read, I thought, God, this is just incredible, man. I'd love to, I'm desperate to do it. And then meeting the chaps, I thought, yeah, this will be an amazing experience. And it really proved to be. So in the week's rehearsal, I think, because we only had 2 weeks to shoot it, it was more about blocking where we would be at various stages of the dialogue and various stages of the scene. In terms of backstory, I don't know, I feel like that's always the actor's work to come up with that. And if whatever happens, it seems to be in conflict with what the director and writer think, then you begin to discuss it. But I think if there's no problem, then for the most part you sail through. I feel like that's the homework you must bring to it.
One of the things that was really nice, I really enjoyed about the shoot and the rehearsal process, was that all the actors were in the room all the time, and so it was quite a bonding. You know, for that whole rehearsal week, we were all there in a room together all day, and so it just enabled us all to kind of get to know each other and start building relationships. And one of the things I really like is the interplay between the actors when they're not speaking. And I really felt that there was lots of it was quite a rich. The gaps between the dialogue were quite rich.
Which something like this, I think a lot of it depends upon the politics that you're creating within the room, which I suppose, to be honest, is what attracted me to it more. The interplay of the characters in the room. And given that we knew that we'd only be doing it for 3 weeks, it's a freeing experience. You think, well, let's make the most of this, you know. And I think we did.
What I find interesting with it is that you can see it as sort of a study in power at various levels of the way that people exert power. And what's fascinating with it is that you have this power play that's happening on the global stage, but then the whole thing within the room as well. And I'm just curious about, as you were creating these characters, writing these characters, did you have any people in mind? You don't have to say who they are, but...
Well, sometimes very specifically and sometimes less specifically. David, the guy that Anthony Sher plays, there's a guy that wrote the paper on whether we should join the Euro, who works for the Treasury and who's basically employed to be the cleverest man in the country, and is the cleverest man in the country. So he was very explicitly sort of the person that I was thinking of when I was writing him, and someone that was treated as such by the other participants. They sort of know he's a bit fuddy-duddy, but also that he's just like got stuff in his head that no one else has got. And then others, they were conglomerates of various people I've either met. I've spent my life in politics doing bits and pieces, so and my sister works in Parliament, so I'd either met or thought a lot about.
You can tell us backstage afterwards who Gary is.
Peter Mandelson came to a barbecue.
So Peter Mandelson, pause.
In 1992 in Newbury, where I was a member of the Labour Party, and told us all to vote Lib Dem. And he was an incredible sort of presence. And there's elements of Mandelson to him. Yeah.
Before I open it up to the audience, perhaps you could all talk about what you thought about and the idea behind India and Pakistan. Why you chose that as the scenario?
It was basically two countries where there was a clear animosity between them, where there was hints of serious nuclear possibilities, and India and Pakistan seemed to fit that. We also toyed with Eastern Europe, and we've got an entire backstory for Eastern Europe. As to what Gary might be referring to is Eastern European stuff. I looked at Israel quite seriously, but it just felt like it would become the issue, Israel. And India and Pakistan, there's something that feels very different to them that was useful to creating the gap that we needed, so that they could think about them intellectually rather than necessarily. And so that's sort of how they ended up.
I thought it's interesting because it also taps into sort of colonial attitudes as well, exactly. About a relationship. So there's a certain sense of guilt in the room about what we should or shouldn't do and how bad we feel.
Absolutely, yeah. Nick Burns' character at one point apologises to Mo, not knowing that Mo is Indian rather than Pakistani. Do you know what I mean? That absolutely is the sort of yeah.
Yes and no. I think that as you sort of as you're growing up, you expect your teachers or your doctor or your politicians or whoever it is to kind of have the right answers. And as you get older, you realise that there's plenty of areas that there are no right or wrong answers. You just it's people doing their best to make the decisions that they believe to be right, given the circumstances that they're presented with, and it's all shades of grey. And so I think for me that one of the things that I found most interesting about the premise was that these people don't know the answers. There are no right answers. There's just what they believe at that time, and ultimately in that final question there is all they have to go on is their own instincts. And in fact, the room is probably swayed by the most intelligent man, possibly working for the government, by an idiosyncratic aspect of his life that really bears no resemblance to the matter at hand at all. And so
it's really interesting that it goes as far as asking that question, and it did in all the minutes too. That these civil servants would, that you'd have thought that they'd stop before that moment and go, "This is for the politicians, this moment." But in every single scenario, they went as far as asking, "Do we nuke people?" And it's fascinating that they take that responsibility on.
Yeah, there's you might know more about this than I do, but I believe that every Prime Minister, when they come into government, they have to write a sealed letter to all the heads of the nuclear submarines about what to do in the event of that Britain and the governing body is destroyed by a nuclear weapon, and should they retaliate, should they not retaliate, or is it left up to the commander of that submarine? And the fact that a Prime Minister would have to sit there and write that letter and make that decision based on this hypothetical situation is extraordinary. And how can there be a right answer?
So with the idea that you were creating this hypothetical situation with your script, and I've heard writers before talk about the fact that the character overtakes them and the character becomes fully formed as they're writing them, and in a way their decisions as a writer are dictated by the character themselves. Were you surprised by the end that you created?
Yes. I mean, it's such a long time ago, it's very hard to remember. But yes, I think so. Yes, I don't know if I asked.
That's a pretty definite answer.
Yeah.
And Shaun, in terms of Tom's character, as you sort of develop that role, were you kind of surprised yourself by the script that you had and the character that you were meant to play in terms of how you might have reacted? I'm just very curious, when you're placed in a hothouse situation, you're expected to play a role that you may not necessarily as a person agree with.
That's what I thought was interesting about it, the idea of you take these people at a snapshot in their lives and they have to make these decisions, and what's going on, at least for Tom, in their personal life informs how they are that day in the room. That's what I thought was interesting about it. And then the more we rehearsed and the more we got it, on its feet, but around the table, it became very clear what the relationships were and how you would respond to that, to the goading of one person, rather than keeping a clear mind and having the emotional, like you said, the emotional sort of stability to be able to make those decisions, but allowing your buttons to be pushed by someone else for what's going on in your personal life. I thought that was like a really intoxicating thing to do.
Gary affects you.
Yeah,
like
totally,
really
and that's what I think is, that for me at least, was interesting about the playing of it, you know.
Quite a lot is from the minutes. I mean, quite a lot. The questions they ask at the point that they ask them are from the minutes. So the points where they get to in the scenario, and certainly the scenario and how the scenario developed is from the minutes. There's quite a lot that's different now to then, and so and there's quite a lot of I had to teach myself an understanding of millisieverts. Which weren't something that were widely discussed then, and but the science is more sophisticated. Yeah, no, Twitter certainly didn't exist in 1972. The science, and so the certain things had to be very, very different. But yeah, a lot was taken from those original meetings.
And beyond the sort of technical political discussions, did you feel when you were reading these minutes the sort of personality shining through?
No, because it's very, very... It's
very British.
It's written by a civil servant, so it's
fair enough. Okay, stupid question.
There's not much personality in them. There's sort of just kind of like, we discussed this, and certain people voted this way, and certain people voted the other way, and it's that rather than sort of
Yes, he asked me to lift up my skirt.
Exactly. That doesn't feature. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think so, because the more informed we get about the world and our role in the world, I think that you would, hopefully, I think that there would be a shift, I think, from, I would hope so.
But I guess, and you read more of the scenarios than I did, but I guess that they're sort of different every time, and I guess the different circumstances and again, like the different things that are going on in different people's personal lives, that actually, Austin, the kind of the young, impressionable junior civil servant, was actually very malleable and could have been persuaded either way, depending on had David made that speech or had he not made that speech. I guess it could have gone differently, and had Tom being a bit more level-headed and being able to put Gary to not respond so hotly to Gary and put his argument forward in a calmer way, perhaps he might have persuaded Austin otherwise. I do think that in these scenarios, whether it's a situation such as that or any sort of meeting, often the really strong personalities can really set the agenda. Same in politics, yeah. Rehearsing was really, like that week's rehearsal was really important, just because essentially it's, in some respects, it's not one long scene, but it sort of is, because there's no where do you break it up, and that was one of the things I found really hard. I don't know if you found this, Shaun, but just like where do you start a shot and where do you stop a shot? Because and so we sort of made these not arbitrary, but there's a chunk of subject matter here that sort of roughly comes to an end here, although it doesn't quite, it still seeps into the next bit, and so we just divided it up into sections just so that we could get a handle on it.
And you had rules, didn't you? You had rules for when the camera can move and when the camera couldn't.
Not quite that rigid, but we had sort of, like everything before the meeting started was handheld, and then as soon as the kind of official debate starts, then it all goes static or on track. But basically, the blocking was really important, and then we just tried to each little piece that was about what Tom was making a point or Gary was leading a point. I tried to construct it around that point, and so that person who was making it was probably the pivot, if you like. So if Gary's leading his point, then he became the pivot, and we structured around that.
But was that something that you came with pre-planned, or that transpired in between rehearsals and the shooting?
It came pre-planned and then changed.
Right.
So yeah, that's the way it usually seems to happen.
Again, I've only seen this twice. It's my impression, and I could be wrong on this, but particularly in terms of Tom's character and going back to this idea of the power play within the room, it struck me that the space around him was played at different points in time. So if it was locked on him and then you cut to Gary's character and you had a wider shot of him and him looking more relaxed, that there was this sense of claustrophobia and Tom feeling kind of locked into a situation. And again, that could be me reading into it. Was there a sense that you tried to do that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I suppose there's a combination between those pre-planned ideas that you try and create about lighting or about camera style or whatever, but the best thing that happens is you just get surprised on the day, and it all changes. And for instance, that argument at the end between you and Gary, like I'd imagined that plenty of times, but I'd never quite realised how emotionally impactful it would be, and that sort of changes the way that I had planned to cover it on the day, and also the light changes, and suddenly the sun comes out, and all those, much of the way that 2-minute silence was. I always knew it was going to be a 2-minute silence, but that day we'd had conversations about and we were really fortunate. The sun was brilliant sunshine that day, and it just streamed in the window, and it was. Yeah, it was, things. That's the best thing about. One of my favourite things about shooting is there are so many surprises and unknowns, and I think probably the best work I've done is always when you are free enough to embrace, the moment. Yes.
How much of that was the technical aspect that attracted you to the job as well? The idea of just shooting something in one room largely.
Yeah, it attracted to me. I mean, it was scary.
Yeah.
But the challenge was
enticing.
Yeah.
And likewise for you, Jack, was there actually a challenge on the page actually trying to create a dynamic within a situation?
Yeah. Exactly the same as Tom. Scary and exciting. There's an Armageddon. There's a line in Armageddon where Owen Wilson is talking about.
Sorry, I just realised you're talking about a Michael Bay film.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But he said this is like 98%. I'm 98% scared, or 2% excited, or I might be 98% excited and 2% scared. But that's what makes the experience so intense. Yeah. That's probably my favourite moment in the whole film, and the way Sophie does it, I think, is incredible. I think she votes no because she doesn't believe in the sort of gesture politics. And she doesn't want to in that moment. That she knows it's basically comes down to a moral choice, and morally she can't define it. I think Philippa thinks quite heavily about everything, and I think it's just against her nature to do it. And I think that's ultimately what it comes down to, the nature of the people in the room.